Adele Attack. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. The singer, Adele, recently launched a new album, 30, which had general critical acclaim and, of course, is another commercial success for Adele. Her music isn't to my taste. It invariably puts me in the mind of wanting to commit suicide. But that said, I recognise that she's hugely popular and she can, of course, sing. However, her appearance, of course, caused a problem for a particular individual. Stepped forward none other than Piers Morgan. And, of course, leaving aside the issue of what Adele is, that's a matter I'll be returning to on another occasion, I've explained previously that Piers Morgan is a narcissist, and that the repeated contretemps that he's exhibited with regard to Harry's wife has been as a consequence of how originally she was engaging with him, therefore giving him a sensation of control, providing him with fuel, and therefore they were acting like BFFs. And then she placed him on the shelf. She had no further need for him. She could control him by placing him on the shelf. She didn't need fuel from him, didn't need character traits, and didn't need residual benefits. And therefore that offended his sense of control. She then became painted black. He complained about being ghosted, which in effect is what happened to him. But in the technical parlance, she shelved him, put him on the shelf in order to assert control over him, and thereafter, because of her growing prominence, because of her engagement and marriage to Prince Harry, she appeared regularly on the news, in news items, and therefore came on the radar of Piers Morgan. At each juncture, his narcissism asked the question, is she under control? And the answer was no. He wasn't able to assert control over her directly, and therefore it was necessary for him to do so indirectly by criticising her, smearing her, and generally being provocative. As I've explained elsewhere, just because he was utilising the truth of her behaviours doesn't make him any less of a narcissist, and I direct you once again to my excellent video, The Truth, the Half-Truth, Nowhere for the Truth, to understand how the narcissist will utilise the truth as you understand it to be, or the half-truth, or what you understand to be nowhere near the truth, for the purposes of the prime aims. Mr. Morgan again demonstrates his narcissist credentials as a consequence of an article that has appeared in the Independent newspaper, which explains Piers Morgan mocks an audience with Adele and boasts about his Twitter followers following not being invited. Fans are calling Morgan a bitter little man for his reaction to not being invited to the ITV show. ITV being a channel in the United Kingdom, for those of you who don't know. Piers Morgan, a news article tells us, took a swipe at Adele and her fans after not being invited to the singer's An Audience with Adele show in London. Adele's one-off concert, which marked the British singer's first live UK performance in 4 years, was filmed earlier this month and broadcast by ITV on Sunday, 21st of November. During the show, celebrities including Samuel L. Jackson and Alan Carr asked her questions about her music and personal life. Other stars in the audience of the show included Emma Watson, Dua Lipa, Dawn French and Stormzy. I also recall from other news articles Emma Thompson giving it large like some pissed-up aunt. Morgan, however, was not on the guest list. Now, of course, with his air of self-importance, self-absorption, and the need to assert control, this became problematic for him, as it was an affront and a threat to that control. Now, Mr. Morgan's sense of entitlement means that he believes that he should be invited to such an event. He believes that he is suitably high-ranking and worthy to be drawn to come to the relevant event because the prestige associated with it. And the fact that he wasn't means that it offends his sense of control and wounds him. He, of course, as an unaware narcissist, doesn't realise that's what's happening. He just regards it as a snub. Of course, non-narcissists who wouldn't be invited invariably wouldn't expect to be in the first place, so would think nothing of it, the fact that they had not been invited. And even those individuals who might have thought they would have been invited but weren't would probably work out, well, there's a good reason there wasn't enough space. There are other people who are more important to her than actually me being invited, and therefore wouldn't kick up a fuss about it and wouldn't make a song and dance about it. But not for Mr. Morgan. His narcissism, of course, means that when the event is aired, it amounts to a threat to control because, in his world, he believes he should be there. And therefore, in a lineup of tweets, the 56-year-old broadcaster called Adele's fans sycophantic, whilst also questioning whether or not she was actually singing live. He can't assert control directly over Adele in that moment because he doesn't know where she is. It's a recording of her concert. She comes up on his radar, and his narcissism basically says, you should have been there and you weren't. He then feels indignant about this, his narcissism making him feel that way, so that he's then moved to assert control. He can't ring up Adele, he probably doesn't have a number or couldn't get through the relevant screening of the relevant flunkies to get in contact with her, and therefore the direct assertion of control is denied to him. As ever, like many individuals in such circumstances, he turns to social media to indirectly assert control by smearing her and her fans, calling them sycophantic, and then raising the question of whether or not she's singing live. In one tweet, a fan named John wrote, "You weren't invited because you're a nobody, so off you trot again and go and crawl under your stone." The response from this tertiary source to Mr. Morgan provides challenge fuel. The fact that he labels Mr. Morgan as a nobody and says go and trot off provides him with some negative fuel. That's not a problem. But the fact that it basically says you weren't invited because you're a nobody again challenges Mr. Morgan's sense of his own importance and threatens that control. He could, of course, respond by making a comment generally saying, oh, there's somebody called John who tweeted, and then mocking him or ignoring him. But here he is able to assert control directly. Why? It's easy for him to do so. All he has to do is write a tweet in response. And Morgan replied to John's tweet saying, "Hi John, given I have 7.9 million more followers than you, I steer clear of playing the nobody card." Grandiosity, sense of importance, belittlement through the direct assertion of control. In another tweet, a fan claimed that nobody likes Morgan. Challenge fuel again, to which the journalist and former Good Morning Britain host responded, "Everybody likes me, pig, just some people are in denial." Delusion, insult, assertion of control directly. The article then goes on to explain that soon after, Morgan posted contradicting tweets praising Adele and specific moments in the concert, which was broadcast on ITV on Sunday. He wrote, "Minor irritations aside, there's no doubt that Adele is the best singer in the world right now and right up there with Barbara and Whitney as possessor of the best set of pipes in pop history. Just a shame she's a Spurs fan." Well, actually what's occurring there is that it's a backhanded compliment. He's saying that she's a good singer, but unfortunately she's a Spurs fan. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Morgan supports Arsenal, which are the rivals of Tottenham Hotspur. And where somebody points out later on, where presenter and writer James Kavanagh commented on Morgan's frustration over not being invited to Adele's show, he states, "Tell me you're livid you weren't invited to #an audience with Adele without telling me you're livid." Morgan replied, and again, because that was challenge fuel and he was able to assert control towards Mr. Kavanagh directly, by writing, "No, those things are awful to actually attend. Hours and hours waiting around, endless retakes, way too hot, no alcohol, and a high quota of celebrities I travel continents to avoid." Now, of course, that exhibits his hypocrisy. He was moaning about the fact that he hadn't been invited. And then says, well, it's not something I'd go to anyway, which demonstrates the repeated hypocrisy of the narcissist, and he has to respond in that way to nullify the threat to control posed by Mr. Kavanagh's question. And then somebody made the point that because of his smearing of Adele and her fans, somebody comments, maybe, just maybe, this is why you wasn't invited. and fans began calling him a bitter little man by saying what bitterness and regret looks like. The fact is that the failure of Mr. Morgan to receive an invite threatened his control. His narcissism made him feel indignant about this because of the wounding that he experienced, although he doesn't see it as wounding. He's then motivated by those feelings and thoughts to assert control indirectly by issuing the smearing tweet. When people respond to it, they give him fuel, but where they challenge him further, he then has to deal with them by nullifying the threat to control that their tweets pose, hence the responses that he gave, belittling, invalidating and insulting. Thereafter, he issues a further backhanded compliment, which in part is to do with facade management by saying, begrudgingly, I give you some praise, but actually it's false praise because he doesn't actually believe it. His narcissism is causing him to do it for the sake of appearances, whilst at the same time there's still a barbed comment about her being there being minor irritations and the fact that she's a Spurs fan. So he can't willingly give the praise just in its entirety because his narcissism won't let him do so. And this is another example of how somebody famous gets on the radar of Piers Morgan and how he is then affected by that, wounded, and has to respond to it thereafter, showing a useful dynamic. Of course, Adele isn't involved in the exchange. She probably didn't even know about it until days afterwards when it's been reported in the press, assuming it's been brought to her attention. But Piers Morgan felt moved, and of course felt moved to respond in the way that he did. And he doesn't see that it may well make him look petty and bitter, because his narcissism blinds him to such behaviour. It causes him to believe that he's thoroughly entitled to respond in the way that he did. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.